Hello and welcome to episode 54 of Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. I'm Marshall.
I'm Will.
And with us this week...
That's my line.
You almost messed up your line. And with us this week is author Daniel Jose Older. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I usually pass it off to Will really quick to ask the first question. We kind of usually ask the same question for most of our guests. So go ahead, Will.
So our first question we do ask for everyone, and it's describe your career in 3 words. And they could be completely unrelated. It's like not like a sentence. It's just like, how would you describe your career in 3 words?
That's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. Wow. Okay. Fun, roguish, and iconic.
All right. So let's talk about each of those words for a minute. Let's do the first word, fun. Why would you say it's fun? Or what made you think of that word?
I think I think all those words, ideally, they apply to both the career and the page, right? So I both aspire to and actually do really enjoy writing and the process of writing and even publishing, although it can be hell. I do love it in a lot of ways. And overall, I just feel like I'm living my best life. I've always wanted to tell stories on some level, and I get to do that. And that's really fun.
Okay. And roguish.
I'm really excited to see what this one is about.
I mean, need I say more? I think there's a combination of elements at play with the word roguish. It's that I think in some ways you have to have an element of, I will speak for myself. I have to have an element of roguishness to what I do because we live in, are we swearing? Can we swear on this?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
Yep.
You can.
The fucked up world we live in. You know what I mean? Like, it's really fucked up.
It really is.
If we're being honest, then we in order to succeed at being honest about this world as writers, which is what our job is, literally, our one job, I think there has to be an element of roguishness. I think we have to be able to make people uncomfortable who are always comfortable and then experience what that's like, the blowback and everything else. And, whether that's, again, I think that applies on the page and in how we move in our career. Both of which are part of the writing journey, right? So if the work I do within my books can make people who never got to feel at home in a book before feel at home, then I'm doing my job. If they can make people who always get to feel at home a little bit nervous and uncomfortable sometimes, I'm also doing my job. And if as I move through publishing, I make publishing houses like a little edgy, but also a lot of money, then I'm also doing my job. That's really what I'm here to do is like tell great stories, change the world for the better, make story as a whole and publishing it more specifically, more inclusive, and, open up this world to be bigger and better.
I love it. And what about iconic?
I mean, I think like the work I do with Star Wars has already kind of like taken on this, because of the High Republic, just this level to it that's really gigantic, and I'm really proud of that. And then the work I do on my own that's not Star Wars, I really hope to leave a legacy behind that includes both my own work and the people that I've inspired. And I think that's the essence of being an icon. I'm not saying I am an icon necessarily. What I'm saying is like the idea of iconicness is about that giganticness that is not just about the self, but about, like the self and others and the wholeness, the totality of like who we are, as people. And I just hope that like so many people have found room, like under their wings for me. And I hope that my wings are big enough to hold other people and lift them up too.
Awesome.
That's awesome. So I want to talk about, you did your MFA at Antioch, correct?
Yes.
And it was really about, their program is a lot about social justice as well within writing. And I've heard you speak, and I've heard you, I've read some interviews with you, and you talk about, the importance of mentors, and specifically you said Black women really mentored you and took you under your wing. And I believe it was, and I'm sorry if I say her name wrong. Tanarive Dew. Yeah, Tanarive Dew. I have her book actually right here.
I love that book.
And of how influential, her mentorship was. So can you kind of talk about the importance of mentoring, upcoming writers and, how important it was for you to have mentors?
Yeah, it was Tananarive Dew. It continues to be Tananarive Dew. Cherie Renee Thomas, even before her, was someone who I took a class with at the Frederick Douglass Creative Arts Center in Manhattan back when I was very, very new and still just putting together what it meant to be a writer. She really took me under her wing too. Jacqueline Woodson has been really generous with me in many ways. So it's like so many people. It's a community, and I think that's really what it comes back to is that like you're either in a community or you're not. And that has less to do with like who you're friends with and more to do with how you carry yourself. Because I think there is kind of like a understanding from the outside of the writer's world that it's just about clicks, so like people just like pushing each other forward without them earning it or something. I don't know. There's like weird ideas about writing, and that does happen in different ways. And sometimes those look similar. Like from the outside, you can see a community and you can see a clique or a bunch of people who are just trying to use each other to get higher up the ladder. And sometimes they'll look alike. But the way that you feel when you're moving and the way that you make decisions when you're moving in a community is almost totally opposite from the way you're doing it when you're just trying to get ahead and have yes people around you, And, a community is honest with itself and with each other, with the members inside of it. And so mentorship doesn't just look like people being like, yeah, keep going, you're doing great, when you're not. Mentorship looks like being able to be like, have difficult conversations and be like, this might not be the way, this, you might need to try this, try that. And also hard, real conversations about race and publishing and how messy and complicated that is. Look, the hardest thing about being a writer is the decision fatigue in a way, in terms of publishing. Writing books is the hardest thing about being a writer, but navigating your publishing career is a constant, there's just ongoing, like really complicated decisions. And a lot of them are tiny, but they have huge repercussions and ramifications and which hills to, really stand on and draw blood. Like those are really hard questions and they're different for every writer. They're different throughout the career of every writer. And to not have, like, you need people to talk to about that. People who are more or less in the same kind of realm as you in terms of success or where you're at in terms of how many books you put out, people who've done way more than you and people who are just starting out. Like that's a community. It's intergenerational in that sense. And, that's what it's made up of. So, to be on the receiving end of that also kind of means you're on the giving end of that. Doesn't mean you can do it all the time because you have to manage your own time and it has to come from an authentic place, right? You can't just do it out of guilt or be like, well, someone lifted me up, so I'm going to go lift somebody else up. Like it's a natural relationship. Mentorship, yes, like there are mentorships in college experiences and MFA experiences that are sort of set, but the real relationship beyond that, like the one I have with Tananarive, and others, like that's something that just evolves naturally and you can't really force it. So that makes it a little bit complicated and it's just a truth that I know about it.
So part of the, I was reading something else and I think when I saw you speak, you also talked about this, that you went into juvenile detention centers and, taught kids to write. And it struck a chord with me because I actually was in one when I was a child. And I would always say it's not a place that kids actually belong in. And you mentioned that and that really touched me. So what was it like to go in there and then have these kids be able to give them a space to express themselves?
Yeah, and I do want to say, like, I've done it a number of times. It's but it's always something I would still consider myself kind of a tourist in that work. It's not something that I've made a career out of doing or do like to the degree that a lot of folks who that's like their life's work. But every time I've done it, it has been profoundly effective. It has affected me profoundly. I hope it's affected the students, but you don't know, And every time, like literally every single time, like I can pull up every time I've gone in it from my memory immediately, because each time is such a just soul crushing experience. And not all, that sounds like it's all negative, and it's not. It's also a very inspiring experience, because in the midst of all of that soul crushing, what you meet are real live people who have real live, fires inside them, who still are just desperate to learn and thrive and be in community and do all the things that like kids everywhere do. And that's it's like simultaneously heartbreaking and like, holy shit, like the human spirit is so much bigger than a wall and so much bigger than all of these dungeons that they build around it. And it's still really hard to just be there and hold the space for that. I remember very clearly just a recent, or one of the more recent ones that I did. It was a couple years ago. And it was like they had left the TV on in the rec room where I was teaching. And even though the person organizing the program had given them very specific instructions not to, because she knew it would be a distraction. And the kids were like staring at the TV sort of like intentionally. And it was a really small group, but it was in the middle of everything going on. And I just watched their gaze like slowly start to work its way over to me as I was talking. Like the TV got less and less interesting, and I was just giving my spiel about writing. I wasn't doing anything big or fireworky or performative. I was just talking about being a writer, and to me, it just speaks to like, yes, it's the power of the human spirit, and it's also the power of story. And I think there's just something that is deeply compelling to all of us about story. No matter where we are or who we are, and no matter what that medium might be, music or art or what, but either way, it comes back to story. And I think writing is one of the most pure distilled forms of story. And that's why I love it so much. So, working with kids to tell their own stories, and young people to tell their own stories when they're in a place that's trying to deny them their very essence of humanity, that is life-changing work, even when you just do it a couple times.
Right.
Do you feel that like those experiences, did that really inform you when, say, you were writing like Shadow Shaper and really like developing those characters and that, just the language? Because I feel like that's one of the things that I love about that series. Like it feels like back when I was a kid of how we talked and just the essence of actually living here in New York and growing up here.
Definitely. It was that, and basically all the work combined that I've done with young people, whether it's in different prisons or correctional facilities or correctional facilities. Like just terrible word for that, because like that's not really what it's about. So why do they call it that? It's a lie. But anyway, community organizations, I taught theater and did different kind of organizing work around Brooklyn for a number of years. So yeah, all those relationships and experiences really did go into it. I think the most important thing about being a writer is listening and being able to listen. And dialogue is the most obvious kind of form of that, where it's like, that's like the first stage, I guess, in some ways, because it's surface in a way. Maybe it's deceptively obvious, because like good dialogue, the tricky thing with dialogue is that you have to be able to draw from what you hear and really like capture the voice, but you still also have to put it into service of story and move the story forward if you're trying to tell a story that moves forward. And that's where I think it requires a lot of strategy and cleverness, but it's still at the base of it, it's still about listening. And if you can't listen, what's even the point? Why are you even writing, right? And then I think beyond that, it's listening to yourself, listening more deeply to people beyond just the superficial, and I use the word superficial in quotation marks, level of dialogue, and really hearing what they're saying. And I think that's where we get into the more kind of complicated levels of like writing people who aren't you and all that other stuff. If you can't listen, just give up now. You know what I mean? Like, right. I don't want to tell anybody to give up, but that's where that's where the work needs to happen, is in listening. And again, like listening to yourself.
For sure.
Yeah. When you were writing Sierra specifically for Shadow Shaper, were you nervous about writing from the perspective of an Afro-Latina?
Yes. I think a better word for it is like, I take that responsibility very seriously. think the way it played out in my mind was like, okay, I'm writing this book, you know, that's a very like Latinx book in a time when there are very few Latinx books out in the world. And of those, even few of them are fantasy. So it stands a good chance of however it does in the world, it's going to be one of the books that is like the, you know, Latinx fantasy of the year, because there's just not going to be a lot because there weren't a lot at that time. Thank God there's more now. And I was like, you know, if I kind of leave it vague, then the girl is going to be coded as like sort of like that light, you know, me. And that's the default for Latinos, you know, it's like a light brown or whatever. And that publishing will do, that mainstream publishing and media and everything else. This is like, oh, it's a Latinx kid, or it's a little Latina girl. Cool, make her like brownish, whatever, vaguely Latina. And you know, I just really felt like that's a form of anti-Blackness that happens in erasure, and so it was important to me to, you know, take that seriously. And then it was also like, yeah, okay, if you're gonna make this character Afro-Latina, it has to be dealt with. That like, this community is not one big happy family, and that it is quite fractured and quite fucked up on a number of levels. And, you know, people will be like, why is that, you know, Tia Rosa character in there? And it's like, cause she's real, you know, that's the most, that moment where she talks about the bottom of the foot and everything is like, you know, so that's the most quoted back to me as something that people have actually heard line of the whole book. And it's by people who are Asian, you know, like South American, African, like people from all over this planet have heard that exact phrasing of anti-Blackness, which lets you know how global a phenomenon it is and how fucked up it is and how so many of us have that in our families. And like, it would have been very easy to tell a story about like a Latino community in Brooklyn that was like, everything is great, but that would have been a lie. And I wasn't comfortable doing that. So, you know, I felt like this is the way to go. And again, I think it comes back to responsibility and taking it seriously.
You know, you've been, that's great. I love listening to you talk about Shadow Shaper a lot. You were quoted that you came to fuck things up, right? When it came to like writing, right?
Absolutely.
And like, it goes back to like your earlier response about like publishing and your career and responsibility. But did you come in like when you were thinking about your career that like you wanted to write adult, you wanted to write middle grade, you wanted to write YA, or did it happen like organically because that's the way the stories came?
Yeah, it was more organic. I kind of knew in the back of my mind that I was just going to try a lot of different things. Just because that's the kind of artist I've always been. When I was more doing music, the music was kind of across the board. I would try lots of different styles and play with things. And I just find that to be like really interesting voice wise. Even like, I love it like on an album, you know, when like there'll be a track that's like fully symphonic. There'll be a track that's just like a guy and a guitar. There'll be a track that's like metal. And somehow it forms a unified whole and it works. You know, I always really gravitate towards that degree of like, just voice complexity and using lots of different sounds in different ways, you know. So I figured that would be true. It wasn't a grand strategy. It was more like, well, let me go in and see what's what. And Shadow Shaper was the first thing I wrote. I didn't have a strong sense of like the categories yet. I kind of learned as I went in those first couple of years. The first draft of Shadow Shaper is very like borderline middle grade because I was kind of just modeling it off Harry Potter, which is pretty much middle grade for the first 3 books, you know, and those categories were really forming at that time. They were formed, but they were kind of in motion. They're always in motion. And then I was like, started writing short stories. And I mean, the honest truth is there's not really much of a market for short stories that are young adult or children's at all. So that was part of it too. But I was also just like, I figured, I knew I was going to write adult shit too. And it really was just like whatever the story wants is what I'm going to do.
Cool. So I want to talk about Star Wars a little bit because all of us here are Star Wars fans and are obsessed with it. I'm
wearing mine.
So I want to talk about.
Nice.
Yeah.
I wore this shirt on purpose. I have probably 200 Star Wars shirts, but I'm like,
wow.
I have way too many T-shirts. Let's not get into that. But
that's hilarious.
I you know, I knew the Star Wars stuff was going to come up at some point, so that's why I'm wearing this shirt.
You were ready. That's good.
And Will beat me to the punch, but go ahead, buddy. Sorry.
Sorry.
I'll probably have a follow-up.
You wrote the Lando Calrissian and Han Solo book.
Yeah.
And then, first, what was that like, being asked to do a Star Wars novel?
Amazing. I feel like I don't ever have good answers to these questions because it's exactly as amazing as you imagine it to be. It was amazing. Like, I was blown away by it. At that point I was still really early on in my career. I think I put out, I guess, 2 or 3 books. I had like 2 or 3 books come out in the same year, really in quick succession. So everything happened kind of really fast. And I'd done the short story for them. And I did it with a very clear, idea that, I really want to write a novel. And I'm pretty sure I told them, I'm pretty sure my agent told them too. And we were both just like, so, if a novel comes down the pipeline, we're your guy. And a novel came down the pipeline. So I think it happened much faster than I expected it to. And that was amazing. I think I had to actively restrain myself from immediately emailing them back and being like, yes, because I have an agent and that's his job to be like, wait, no, and hold on, not no, but let's get the price right and all that. So I let him do the negotiation as a good little client. And it was just truly thrilling. And then the experience of it was really fun. It was really, really fun. I got to go out there. That was the first time I went out to Lucasfilm, which was an absolute thrill. And they're just all really, really cool people. I can honestly tell you, Story Group is a dream to work with. It's just great.
Yeah, the Story Group I've never interacted with them, but I've been in Star Wars gaming communities for a long time, and it's like everybody I talk to, the dream, anybody who writes, obviously the dream is to one day write a Star Wars novel, right? So I don't know if this is what Will was going to say next, but as far as just staying on Lucasfilm here for just a minute, now that the High Republic is starting to unfold, how was that? Was that experience with the writer's room and all that much different than your early experience with the Lando Han novel? I'm just curious because I know that the High Republic is something a lot of us are looking forward to because this is a whole era of unexplored Star Wars awesome that really has no limits, right? So what was that creation process like? Because I mean, your name is next to all these other folks sitting around trying to create this stuff, and all of us aspiring writers what if I was in that room? So if you could speak to that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, it is very different because you're always thinking much more meta and micro at the same time. And that's great, actually. That's really what's cool about it. So with a Han and Lando one-off, you're bouncing it kind of off the movie in terms of just and then you're always thinking in terms of the larger galaxy and the whole saga and all that, sure. But you're only going to be able to throw a little bone here or there, like an Easter egg around there, whatever at the best, and which is cool. That's fine for what it is. But this being what it is, and this being this huge interconnected project, and that we're all really involved on the larger story beat level and on the individual project level. And the individual projects have really micro connections that are much deeper. What's really cool about it is that they're not just Easter eggs. They're actually quite complicated, interconnected moments that really matter, and some Easter eggs matter, but it's not just to be hey,
it's not whatever. Pure fan service is what you're saying.
It's not fan service. Right. It's part of the storytelling, and we're able to do that because it's happening simultaneously, right? So it's not 40 years later, you're oh, let's, which is a cool thing. I'm not knocking that at all. It's just hey, you can't, there's different limitations. Mm-hmm. And so with this, as Cav is writing into the Rising Storm, rather, I'm putting other touches on I'm writing my middle grade, which links into it directly. So we're literally on the phone or on Skype, being okay, there's this and then that, and then this guy's going to come in here. Does that work? Bouncing drafts off each other, or scenes or whatever. Yeah. And with characters, grabbing each other's characters and then bouncing off the dialogue is just something they would say, so it's very live time interconnectivity, which is, I don't think it's been done quite this way, to my knowledge, with a group of novels and comics that we're doing. It feels brand new. And at the end of the day, it's just really fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting. Can't wait for all that stuff to come down.
Me neither.
Yeah, I got the comic book. I've just read it, and it's amazing. And I'm super excited about the middle grade novel you're writing. So Lula is one of the characters that you specifically created.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that, like the energy behind creating her and what was important to you when you were creating new characters?
Yeah, well, with Lula, I knew I had a team that I wanted to put together. It was like the Beckett moment in Solo that didn't actually make it into the movie, when he's like, I'm putting together a team.
Right.
That's also what happened with Mike Siglane, the head of publishing, when he brought us together. Basically, he was like, I'm putting together a team. And then I went off and was like, all right, to my imagination, I was like, I'm putting together a team. And, with Lula, it's interesting because most characters, you kind of have a certain impulse towards them, and that's like the initial spark of creation. And Lula, it's been very like more kind of level. It's not like with a lot of characters have like a peak where you're like, oh, it's this. You'll have like a really clear image, like with Reza in the Bone Street Room, right? Like I very clearly I actually saw someone who looked exactly like what she looks like, and I was like, that's Reza.
Love
and
that
in my
character.
head, like everything happened from there, right? It's just like, and she was driving like a one of those like black taxis, and she had fingerless gloves, and she was cool as shit. And she just lit a cigarette in front of me when I was on break one day. I forgot about that. Anyway, so from there it was like really easy. Lula's someone that formed much more gradually, and even like as I was writing her in the first issue, I was kind of learning who she was, who she is, and then seeing Harvey Tolly Bow's artwork of her kind of like showed me a little more. But the main thing with Lula was like I just wanted her to be someone who was so deeply entrenched in that Jedi life, like everyone is, because you're taken as a kid, right? You're a toddler basically when you enter into your Jedi training. But she's also like really enthusiastic about it. And she's like, this is my shit. I just want to be the best at this. And then part of that was also knowing that I had a character coming onto her horizon who was Zine, who was someone who's like totally outside of the Jedi Order, brought up to not like the Jedi, to not trust them, to not think that people should use the Force, and also has the Force. And how those two things are different, and how they're contrasted and what tensions that brings up, and how they're also just really, good friends and what that could mean. And I knew those two things were kind of going to be happening simultaneously. And a lot of that was just kind of throwing them up against each other to see what happens.
Wow.
Now, when you went to Skywalker Ranch and you're in the writing room and everything, I've been at Skywalker Ranch a couple times actually.
Oh, really? How'd you go there? That's so cool.
I went, it was a birthday surprise from Carrie. I went with her in 2011. And then I went a couple other times with her to do some press and stuff that they were doing at Lucasfilm.
Carrie Fisher, basically.
Oh, I know who Carrie Fisher is.
Yeah.
You're talking about Carrie Fisher?
Yeah. That's what he does. Yeah. He works in hair and makeup. He hasn't told you this, but he...
right. He did, but I forgot.
He drops Carrie like, wait, who's Carrie? I tease him about it all the time, Daniel.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Nice.
Thanks. So when I went up, and I got the tour of the Skywalker Ranch, did you guys get to tour the whole entire facility and everything? Yeah. And what was that like for you as a fan?
No, it was incredible. It was you were there. There's nothing else like it. Yeah. And I was there as a fan and as a creative. And I think actually, as much as I am literally a lifelong fan, I think the fandom stuff hit me more at Lucasfilm offices. I'm sure you've been there too, right? In the Presidio. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's where my fandom stuff was on 1,000, because that's where they had, because for me, one of my happy places with Star Wars is the monsters. And so, ILM being there, and then the animation studios, all that stuff, that's where it really got me. And I did at Skywalker Ranch, of course, have all those fan moments, but it's more that place is so creatively charged, and the energy there is just so good and beautiful and fun and all this stuff. And I really just felt inspired to be there and excited to be there, and to be there and working on a project that I got to just take part in and feel a part of and everything. So those are my strongest memories, are just being like this walk I talked about on the panel when we released the first couple novels, just this walk that I took where I just it was daybreak, and the brainstorming session that I had with myself, I felt like the amount of work that I did in that maybe 20 minutes to 45-minute session was worth a week of work that I do in a regular. It was so concentrated and powerful. And I literally just sat down and I just took a walk. I came back to my cabin and I just went, and knocked out this whole thing. And it was something I had to present that day. And even saying that, like, I wasn't nervous about it because it was right there. So that's my memory of the place.
That's amazing. Do you, were you worried, like, when all of you were creating this, because there is a certain negativity that also comes with fandom, that I think truly is in the minority, but sometimes they feel like they're the loudest voices, and it's, you know, because it can be harassing. Do you worry about that? Like,
it's like, worry is the wrong word, because like, you know, it's going to happen. It's not a mystery. You know, like, worried about it implies that there's a possibility it might not happen. It's like, I wouldn't call it worried. It's more like, I could set my clock to it, you know. Like, well, here comes the bullshit, and I don't want to minimalize like how rank and awful it can truly be, because it is truly like disgusting, and it is truly much worse for women, and especially women of color, and especially Black women, and that is really fucked up. And my main concern is like other creators seeing it and it having the effect of like gatekeeping, which it's intended to do. Its intended effect is to make people of color, especially, like, not want to write Star Wars. And, you know, my concern is that it's successful at that in any level, because I am committed to having more people of color write Star Wars. So, but that also serves to like make me louder and more, you know, determined to be victorious in everything I do, and like kick more ass on every level, and like not back down on any level. And like, you know, to me, it's in the work though. Like, the work I do speaks for itself. So I don't really feel the need to like mash trolls online. Every once in a while I feel a desire to, but in terms of like getting done what I need to get done, my job is to like live my best life, speak my truth, and write great stories, you know, in whatever order that comes, and like make Star Wars more inclusive. So I'm doing that. So I'm winning.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It worries me too, as far as fandoms go. Like Will said, it, you know, I'm a fan of, you know, multiple different fandoms, and it's like, I'm passionate about it, but I've never taken it to the point to where I would attack the creator or you know, try to bring them down in some way. And so I know this happens around, you know, book trilogies and authors and stuff in general. And I just wonder, because you said that, I just wonder what's your normal kind of approach to the trolls and the haters just in general?
I ignore them. Yeah. I ignore them. Yeah. Like, that's my normal approach to it. I mean, there were other times in my life when I would like get a kick out of like, you know, like quote arting and destroying them. And, you know, it's fun sometimes. Yeah. But mostly I find ignoring them is the way, you know, but I don't begrudge people who feel the need to engage. I just don't want them to do it in my mentions, because it gets old quickly. And it does kind of like goad them to keep going. You know what I mean? So my general strategy is to ignore them, but I do think they have to be addressed. You know what I mean? Like, not directly to them, but I think the issue of it, you can't just ignore it. It doesn't go away when you ignore it, right? Like, the death threats continue, particularly to women. And that matters. And I think it has to be dealt with. So I actually don't know the answer. You know, there's people like Mickey Kendall Carnithia on Twitter who do this work and like know actually strategies that work in dealing with this stuff, you know, and I know like Star Wars is trying to figure out the best ways to deal with it. And, you know, I don't know the way to do it. As a creator, I just know I keep creating, and I try to support as best I can the people that are getting the brunt of it. And I make sure I take care of myself and make my social media a safe space as much as possible, and tap out when I feel to. And, you know, that's basically what you got to do. Yeah.
So talking about like safe space and, you know, everything that we're touching upon, you helped in, I think it was 2014, change the World Fantasy Award from not being H.P. Lovecraft, and you were really like the driving force, and it worked. So can you talk about like the importance that was for you and like for the community as whole, because it totally needed to be done, and what that was like for you?
It just seems self-evident. Like, I just think, why would this motherfucker be? I mean, I know why, but it's also just like garbage. And I guess it was like, it's a time when people are really talking the talk, and it just felt like, if you're going to talk the talk, like, here's how you walk the walk, right? Like, it's not enough just to be like, oh, we're all equal, right? But you're still upholding like these racist giants and lionizing them in everything you do. So what are we really talking about, right? And to kind of tie it back into what we were just talking about, I think an important distinction has to be made, and I only say this because I see it getting blurred a lot. And there's a huge, they're totally different things. It's like to critique versus like to be a troll, a asshole, abusive, like trash person. You know, like those are different, and they get conflated. And like critique is important. We need to be able to critique, and we need to take critique, and we need to deal with it. And it's not always easy, and there's layers to it, and we all have to sometimes topple our idols, and it's hard. And that is also being an adult. And like, you know, different people deal with it differently, as we have seen many times over. But I know that's just part of growing up. And so, you know, for me, I'm not going to pretend Lovecraft was never someone I idolized. He was someone I read like mid-career, and there's things about his work I like, and he's an abhorrent racist. And I think it's actually quite easy to hold those two things in the balance and say there are things about this dude that I liked and learned from, and the dude was an abhorrent racist that we don't need to make statues of, you know? Right. And that's another thing that gets conflated by the critique of the critique, which I'm using critique in the loosest sense when I say that. But the trolling of the critique is that they want to sort of make it into like censorship, or people being like, oh, no one can ever read Lovecraft. And it's like, you know, if you take what I say on the terms of what I actually said, then we could have an interesting conversation. But instead you want to make up shit that's easier for you to, you know, have a little rally about. And I can't argue with points I didn't make. So y'all are on your own, right? I actually do really love a good debate, but these folks aren't trying to have one. But the bottom line is, you know, like, you don't get to call fantasy and science fiction as a community a safe place or welcoming to people of color when you hold up a racist to be like the symbol of your, you know, and the epicenter of like your powers. Like, that's not how it works. The same is true, you know, across the board. That's why it's so important that the statues are falling, you know, across the country right now. Like, that matters. It's important. Just like the whole premise of literature is that stories and symbols matter.
Yeah.
So if they matter, then they matter, right? If they're powerful, then they're powerful. If they can save, then they can kill. And that's just a level to it that I think people don't want to deal with when it comes to, you know, things they idolize and things they worship and you know, like just all that. I just think it's a false flag argument that they're constantly having with themselves, because then they don't want to deal with what's real.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. Sorry, just reminded me, Marshall has been doing stuff in his community to change.
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up.
Sorry, Marshall. I wanted to talk about it because we've been talking about it, because Marshall is like one of the few Black people in his town, and he's been really having to do a lot of the heavy lifting and explaining to people. And I see the toll that it's taking on him. And it, you know, it makes me so angry, and that I really wish more people who weren't of color would actually step in and also say that this is morally wrong, that this needs to change. Right. And it's just, so we've been trying here at the podcast to give Marshall love and support, and to make sure that, you know, he has a space to really talk about it. And I'm sorry, Marshall, you can talk about it. No, I did want to bring it up because it's important.
And I think what Daniel said earlier is the crux of why you're doing what you're doing, Will, is that we have this community and we have this very diverse group of writer friends that, you know, that we support, right? So what Will is alluding to is that I'm actually live in a town that's named after a Confederate general. I live in Fort Bragg, California. And so I'm on a committee that is trying to...
Braxton Bragg?
Braxton Bragg, yes.
That motherfucker?
Yeah, one of the worst humans.
Also a bad general.
Oh, like, terrible at everything. He's a terrible general, terrible person. It's horrendous. So
got his ass beat in Tennessee.
And the government is actually, because there's a Fort Bragg, North Carolina as well, which is a military base that they're actively trying to change the name of. So the short version is I got on this committee a little less than a year ago to try to decide whether or not the town should change its name. Right. And so, I mean, we all know what the answer will eventually be, but me sitting on a committee as one of the, I'm a teacher, by the way, in my community, and it's like a very small community. So, you know, I am trying to tell them what my experience is and trying to be like, this is why we should do this. Yet I'm talking to people with like that own half the town, literally, or that have streets named after them that live around the corner from me. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. And it's like, and trying to, it's a constant churning of just trying to communicate. Like it's not, and like you said earlier, Daniel, it's not, it somehow becomes about them and becomes about like, well, don't take my town from me. That's my history. But at the same time, you can't say that and then also say, well, where are we going to stop taking down, you know, Confederate monuments? And it's this whole conversation. It's like, but you're all saying the same thing. Like really what you don't want things to change because you like it the way it is, but it's wildly offensive that we're living this way. Right.
It is. It is.
So that's kind of the short version of the whole thing. And then,
man, I feel for you. That really sucks. Cause like, you know, my situation is very different with the Lovecraft thing, because I literally just put up a petition online. It took me 5 minutes and it blew up. And like, I talked it up a couple of times on Twitter, you know, that's why it cracked me up when like some of the fanboys would jump in my mentions and be like, why are you obsessed with Lovecraft? And I was like, it took me 5 minutes. Like it really wasn't a lot of work I did, you know, like I'm sorry, dude. But, you know, but to sit in the room with the people, and there were people, you know, I definitely wasn't the only one. People have been calling this out for years. N.K. Jemisin is one of my favorite, like, outspoken people in the sci-fi world and fantasy world who've been really amazing about a lot of stuff with this. But there were also people on the inside doing the work who would like report back to me and be pushing the right buttons on the inside. And like, that's some of the hardest shit to do. And looking in someone's face and like the microaggressions and the excuses and the justifications and the bullshit and like having to just keep a sort of a straight face and any kind of like diplomacy or demeanor in the midst of that, of someone like literally devaluing your own humanity to your face is like absolutely soul crushing. And I just, I hope you do what you need to do, you know, to heal in the course of it and step away when you can or when you need to, because it requires healing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And like I said, I lean on Will in those moments for sure. So and the rest of my community, my family for sure. But but yeah, so I'm like I say, I appreciate the work that you're doing too. And like, you know, and making that happen. I think that's super important. So gives me hope.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So let's talk about Flood City, your newest middle grade novel. How did you come up with the idea of Flood City?
So this is actually a book I wrote 10 years ago. I wrote it immediately after, I think I wrote Shadow Shaper, I wrote a draft of Shadow Shaper, and then I was on submission. And I didn't have shit else to do. So I wrote some short stories. I took that class with Cherie. And out of that, I pulled one of them and turned it into Half Resurrection Blues. And somewhere in there, I was revamping Shadow Shaper pretty massively. I overhauled it. And a lot of the mythology changed. And the first draft had a ton of monsters in it and stuff. So I pulled a bunch of them out. And so I had a bunch of monsters kind of laying around that I wasn't sure what to do with, but I knew I wanted to use somewhere. And I had read The Count of Monte Cristo, again, late in life. I mean, it was my late 20s or early 30s, but still. That's such a foundational text. It was so good. And it blew my mind. And I loved it. And it was it's such an expansive story. Like, because it was serialized, like, he really just like goes to town and like goes in lots of different directions, but pulls them all together really well. And I found that really inspiring. And I had up to that point written these two books that were very, very not small, but just very tight in terms of their focus, right? One was in first person singular and the other was in very, very close third. And so I hadn't gotten a chance to really just like explore in a wider sense in a world. So I wanted to do that, and somehow middle grade really felt like a good way to do that. Just have all these wild, weird characters in this crazy world and ridiculous world, and like just sort of turn them loose and see what happened. And so that's really what I set out to do with Flood City. And then it's definitely Star Wars influenced, but I also wanted to kind of talk about a moment in future history when they brought up it was pretty soon after Katrina. And I was thinking about people being left behind, and I was working with those kids in Bushwick at that time, and we were doing some theatrical stuff around Katrina, and it was just like the idea that they knew inherently that were that to happen in New York, that they would be the ones left behind too, was sort of simultaneously heartbreaking and a big fire underneath me in writing that book. I was also thinking about like Cuba and where my people are from, and the moment. Like there was this kind of moment after Spanish rule, and as the U.S. was taking over back in 1898, when it must have felt like, oh my God, we're free from Spain, and then immediately like, oh shit, we have the U.S. on our backs, which is the story of like so much of colonialism and the conquering. But I just wanted to like hold that moment for a minute and think about like what that must have been like, and that's kind of what happens in Flood City. There's like these ruling chemical barons who caused the floods, and then they're being fought off, and then this kind of like UN type intergalactic organization comes in, and these like really giant blue peacekeepers who are just kind of like clumsy and terrible take over, and then they're sort of still dealing with them. So it's about all those things, and I just threw all those things into a pot and stirred it, and out came Flood City.
It's a great book. I really enjoyed it, by the way.
Thanks.
What I thought was really interesting in what you just said too is the idea of who would get left behind in this situation, and to know that Flood City is full of brown and black people of color. It's like, and they're just struggling trying to make it work. And these kids that are so optimistic and trying to make it happen for their families. It was I really liked the contrast of, especially towards the end, and I don't want to spoil too much, but especially towards the end where the kids are saying, we can actually do this without them. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like we don't actually need them, and we can actually come up with a way to survive without them. It was just, I had my kids in mind when I was reading the book because, Will is a very voracious, he reads an insane amount. He's got all your books somewhere near him, I'm sure. Nice. But I honestly I take recommendations from him often, and this book, and so when he tells me to read a middle grade book is what I'm saying, or a young adult book, I think of my children because they like to read as well. I think they would really identify with these characters who, one, get to hang out on rocket boots all day and jet around the city, which is badass. But at the same time, like, they don't need the adults really in their life to figure this out. Like the adults are there, but it's a really epic thing that they are able to do. And it gives a lot of hope. And I really enjoyed the book. I really did.
That's great. That's great. It touches on two things that I really cared about with this book. One is that like they're all really different in a lot of ways, right? But they're also like in their interests. Yeah. And that really, to me, really speaks to like the need to just open up this idea of kind of organized activism. What does it mean to change the world, right? Like you have a musician. I mean, first of all, you have a horn player and a drummer, and the drummer is also a holographer. And then there's this kid who's like a total zoology nerd. Yeah. You know what I mean? And like, I love it. Put those pieces together to do something huge. Mm-hmm. And because at no point is any of them like, oh, what are you doing? That's not going to do it. That's not going to change the world. Right. Like they're all just like, oh, cool. You play the horns. Oh, there's iguanagles.
Yeah. That's necessary for what we need. It's really,
exactly. Like, we'll work it out. Like, let's just throw it all together. And that's what people have done throughout history to survive. It's thrown it together and found ways of finding joy and music and resistance and science, amidst it all. It's a big STEM book for sure. But also, I kept getting pushback on this in the editorial process, is that, like, they really wanted me to explain where the dad was.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there is a moment where Max is just like, I just don't think about it.
Yeah.
He's like, people die every day, like in this town. You know what I mean? Like he probably got lost at sea. I don't remember what the explanation was, but it just didn't matter. And it was like an intuitive thing that I really wanted it to be in a happy family structure and not be this huge tragedy that their dad was gone. That's no shade to dads. I have a dad that I love.
Yeah.
But it just was like when I was thinking through the book, like, it wasn't something that I intellectually was like, you know what? They live in this world where probably, people lose parents constantly.
Yeah.
But my brain was like, every time I tried to be like, all right, do I want to? It just felt like.
But you're right, and it wasn't something that the characters need to be hung up on. Like,
right.
given the world, it's like, yeah, people are dying all the time, like you said, and it's like they are happy even though they don't have. That father.
And it's not that they're like cold-hearted to the death of it, like it matters.
Sure.
But it's like that was some dude he never knew,
right?
You know what I mean? So like the family structure in a system where people just aren't around sometimes for good reasons, is gonna be different. Like, that's what it is. So he just doesn't have that like weight around the idea of fatherhood. Also because it's a big family, like on Flood City, everyone looks out for each other. It's a community. They check in, everyone's uncle and aunt and everybody else. And like, that's just how that shit works. So he doesn't feel like the lack of it because the traditional family structure is wide open there. And I think that's cool.
Totally. It really works well. And I know it's on my kids list next. Cause I said, because they read audiobooks like I do. And they're going through this and I said, okay, your next one is Flood City. It's already in the queue. You got it. So they're excited.
The audiobook?
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook as well, but they listen to audiobooks in the evening with my wife. They sit around and like draw while they listen to audiobooks. So it's my youngest isn't as comfortable with reading novels. My oldest, she'll be 12 next week or this weekend. Right. And she's been reading chunky novels for years and years and years. So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's if you guys read The Certain Point of View, the recent one, The Empire Strikes Back one, she's the writer, the woman who did the audiobook is the writer who did the L3 story.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no. Amazing.
It's all connected.
That L3 story is good. I love it.
Isn't it a good story? Yeah.
That is, yeah.
She killed it.
So Flood City, you wrote 10 years ago. So what took it so long? Was it just not ready when you first wrote it? Was it publishing? Were you like, they didn't know what to do with it?
It's publishing, man. It was all publishing.
This
is during the period when I'm trying to sell Shadow Shaper, getting rejected 40 times on that, mostly from agents. And then that finally got picked up. And then shortly after that, I sold Half Resurrection Blues. I got an agent. Half Resurrection Blues came out before Shadow Shaper just because adult publishing usually moves faster than children's publishing. They both came out in 2015. I still couldn't sell Flood City. Half Resurrection Blues sold as a 3-book deal, and it was a book a year. Shadow Shaper sold as a 1-book deal. And then later, when they realized they had a hit, they turned it into a 3-book deal. So I had my hands full, but I was still trying to sell freaking Flood City the whole time. And I think at one point I chopped it up and tried to sell it as like smaller books and installments, and that didn't work. And I don't know, man. I finally sold it to Scholastic. I don't know why that all happened that way. Publishing is super weird. But I sold it, and then not right before, but about a year before it was scheduled to come out, I sent them a proposal for a book about kids riding dinosaurs in the Civil War. Dr.
Hill Squad.
And everyone was so excited about that. They were like, why don't we buy this as a trilogy and push Flood City to later? And I was like, sure, because I was excited about it too, because I love that series. Dr. Hill Squad is one of my favorite series to write. And so that's what happened. And here we are 10 years later.
Well, I'm glad it's out there now. It's a great book.
Me too. Thank you.
Folks definitely got to check it out. So, Will, we're about at our hour mark. So do you want to
wrap it up?
Yeah, but that's essentially what I'm saying, to be cognizant of Daniel's time here.
This is what he's like the Time Lord.
Literally my job, Daniel.
No, I know. All right, so I guess we'll just go to our last question. I could keep asking you questions all day, but our last question is, what keeps you writing? Like, what just keeps you writing?
The sheer fact of loving it is the most important part. I think I really just love it. It's that, and then it's also just that stories keep happening inside me, and I got to do something with them. Otherwise, I will die. Not to be too dramatic, but that is kind of what happens. Like they can take different forms, and it's not always that the story strictly needs to be in one form or another. There's been stories that I've transferred into multiple forms to see which one works, and I think all of them work, but sometimes it just depends on what the industry wants or is willing to work with. For me, I have something I think I'm announcing tomorrow finally that started as a multimedia, like interactive novel type project in my head. And because I was talking to someone about that, and that didn't work out, and I turned it into a comic book proposal, and that didn't work out, and now it's a young adult novel, which did work out. And at first it was a middle grade novel, and these were all in just proposal stage, so like a chapter or two tops. But it really, and this is over like 7 or 8 years, I think, of just like being, oh, this is what it's gonna be. And I literally, like, the final product was grabbing one thing, was taking that and then grabbing something else entirely and smashing them together into this weird Frankenstein, and then it became, like I said, a YA, which is so wild. But that's the form that I love it, and it transformed so massively in that process, and it's really exciting. That's not to say it wouldn't have been something cool, in any of those other forms. It's just that's the journey that I went on, and if nothing else, you have to be fluid in this industry to kind of keep it moving. You can't afford to be too precious, and it's like you have to hold in the balance. Like, you have to love the work you're doing and the story that you're telling, and honor it and respect it and follow it where it's taking you. But you also can't be precious about it, right? It's like you also have to be able to move. And I think there is a way to do that. I think stories are inherently fluid, and they constantly move themselves, and changes and grow. And you have to be able to do that too as a storyteller, both because of the industry and because stories like that. So it's out of love. It really comes back to love. And I love to learn, and I love to like know that like I'm improving my craft every time I start a story and every time I finish a story, that the process, the journey of writing a book or any project that I write, makes me a better person, a better spirit, a better writer, a better craftsperson. It grows me just as it grows itself. And that's just like an incredibly rewarding process. And I find it very spiritually invigorating, and it's just who I am.
Awesome.
Awesome.
So we obviously can't thank you enough for joining us today. Well, the last thing I normally ask our guests, real quick, because for the show notes, and if people want to find your new stuff coming out or connect with you on social media or anything like that, you did mention something that might be announced tomorrow. I don't know if there's any upcoming projects you want to talk about right now, since this is going to come out in a couple of days. And then how folks can connect with you on social media. So upcoming projects and, any ways they can get a hold of you online.
Cool. Well, since it's Friday today now. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's Friday.
We've actually already announced this project. I can actually talk about it. So that's pretty cool. But first, I'm going to do the rundown before I forget. Okay. My website is danieljoseolder.net. On that website, you can find all my books. You can find also online classes that I have posted, both on Skillshare, which is a really cool video program, classes that have videos of me teaching. There's 2 classes on there that have been really successful and people have really enjoyed. And then there's a new platform up called Knowable that's like an audiobook version. And that has a similar class about storytelling fundamentals. All that is linked on my website under classes, danieljoseolder.net. There's also a blog on there from my years as a paramedic, and that kind of goes through the whole wild journey of me being a medic, which is kind of how I learned to write. So that's a whole other story. On Twitter, I'm at DJ Older. I talk a lot of trash. On Instagram, I'm at DanielJose1. I mostly just repost my TikToks. At TikTok, I'm at DanielJoseOlder. TikTok is my only G-rated social media platform, so you can send the kids to my TikTok. Okay. And I make an effort not to swear there, unlike everywhere else. So that's the main thing. Upcoming, Flood City just came out 2 weeks ago from Scholastic. That is a middle grade novel. My next book is also a middle grade novel. It's called Race to Crash Point Tower. It is a High Republic adventure. In the meantime, you can read The High Republic Adventures, which is an ongoing monthly series from IDW. And in fact, if you're planning to pick up the middle grade, a good place to start is with the comics, because Lula and Zine are both prominent characters in the middle grade, which is cool. Yeah. And then, well, yeah, we'll get to that later. But anyway, so the project that we excitedly announced yesterday is a book called Ballad and Dagger. That is my first young adult since Shadow Shaper, since closing out the Shadow Shaper Cipher. It's a urban fantasy. I haven't figured out the way to express it quickly because it's super complicated, but it's like this teenage pianist in Brooklyn, and he's from an island that sank 15 years ago that was like a secret hideaway for pirates and Sephardic Jews and Santeros in the Caribbean. And they had their own kind of religious practices spring up with their own gods, who are now starting to kind of like show up around Brooklyn. And there's riots in the streets and murders and things. And it's like really, really weird and really fun. So,
sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's like literally the first time I've talked about it publicly, except for a really quick mention of it on a panel months ago that didn't really count. So this is kind of an exclusive in a weird way.
All right. Well, let us know if for some reason it doesn't get announced tomorrow, but you know.
Thank you. I will. Because you never know actually. So
I said, I'll post this on Friday. So if something changes between now and then, you got to let us know.
I've been meaning to follow up with my publicist and find out if it's actually going to be posted or not. Anyway, so let me DM him right now. But yeah, I'll let you guys know.
But we really appreciate it.
When is it scheduled to come out?
Yeah.
When is it actually scheduled? Next year. Okay, cool.
It comes out next year.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, again,
God, sorry, Marshall, I interrupted.
No, you're fine. Thank you again so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure meeting you. I love your books. I've read the Resurrection Blues stuff, and Flood City's great, and and so we follow you, and we'd love to have you back on another time sometime.
Sure, man. Sure. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, Daniel.
Enjoy the rest of your day, Daniel.
Yeah, good to see you. Will. Take care, everybody.
Yeah,
me too.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers by writers to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.